Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our daily Bible study on To Be Like Christ. Today we are in 1 Samuel chapter 28. We're bringing 1 Samuel to a close. Got an interesting chapter today. King Saul, is going to consult a medium for advice. So, yes, you might not have even known that stuff was in the Bible, but it is, and we'll talk about it a little bit. As always, you can download the PDF that you're seeing up on the screen on our website at tobelikechrist.com. And thanks for everyone who's been going out to the website. There's been a lot of people. All right, our first question we need to answer is, when did these events take place in history? This would have been between approximately 1015 and 1010 BC, about to change the millennium here. David lived with the Philistines for a year and 4 months. We're going to talk about David just very briefly in the first couple of verses. Our character section gets a little interesting today. First, we have Saul, who's the king of Israel. He's not really doing what God wants him to do lately. We're also going to talk about Samuel. And wait a second, didn't he die a couple chapters back? Yes, he did, but he'll make a type of return in this chapter. He was a prophet in Israel and a judge, the last significant judge of Israel, who anointed both David and Saul to be king. We're going to talk about David, as I mentioned, just very briefly. He's going to be the next king of Israel. Achish was the king of Gath, a Philistine city where David lived. And then finally, the medium of Endor. This was a woman who Saul consulted. He used her to speak with Samuel after Samuel was dead. And now to our map. Only one location to highlight here, Endor. And no, not the place where the Ewoks live and Return of the Jedi. Isn't that place called Endor? Pretty sure it is. That's Star Wars, sorry. Back when Star Wars was good. Anyway, our map. All right, we're going to Endor today. Endor, you'll see it just to the south, southwest of the Sea of Galilee, between Mount Tabor and Mount Gilboa. Okay, so now for the outline section. I've got everything under one heading, verses 1 through 25, Saul and the medium at Endor. So the setup for this chapter, the Philistines gathered their army to fight against the Israelites. And David, who you may remember from last chapter, was living amongst the Philistines at this time. He was living in Gath. He was actually going to accompany his king, Achish, to battle. But we'll see how that pans out and what God has to say about that. Now Saul, the king of Israel, he was terrified when he saw the Philistine army, and he asked God for guidance, but God didn't give him any guidance. And so when God didn't answer, he decided that he was going to go consult a medium to bring up Samuel from the dead so that Samuel would advise him. Saul was told that there was a medium woman at Endor, and so he disguised himself and he went to visit her. Now, why did he disguise himself? Well, it's because previously he had thrown all of the mediums and the necromancers out of Israel, which is what really should have been done according to God's law in the book of Leviticus. Now, when Saul arrived, the woman was hesitant to fulfill his request because she knew that in doing so she would incriminate herself, but Saul assured her that her secret was going to be safe with him. When she began this process, when she summoned Samuel from the dead, somehow it became clear to her that the man that was sitting across from her was actually King Saul, and she cried out in fear because she thought maybe she had been tricked and actually he was going to punish her after all, but he told her to continue because she wasn't going to be punished. He needed this for information. When Samuel appeared, he asked Saul why he had summoned him, and Saul told him that, well, it was because he needed guidance from the Lord, and the Lord wasn't answering him. Well, Samuel told Saul that he wasn't really going to give him an answer anyway, or either. He wasn't going to advise him because God had rejected Saul as king, really for a number of reasons, but mainly because Saul had failed to obey God in destroying the Amalekites when he was given that task. We read about that earlier in the book. Furthermore, Samuel told Saul that the Israelite army was going to lose to the Philistine army, and that Saul and his sons would join him, Samuel, in death by the end of the next day. So basically Samuel says, by this time tomorrow, you're going to be dead, and you're going to be with me on the other side of the grave. Well, obviously Saul was terrified at this news, and it says that he fell on his face to the ground. And this was kind of the end of the consultation. After the medium had finished, she prepared some food for Saul and his men, and then they departed her house and went out into the night. So we're kind of left on this cliffhanger as we conclude 1 Samuel 28. After writing my application, I thought that maybe I should have done an application on this idea of, these mediums. And I think a lot of people have questions about that. I certainly have questions about it. Some people say, well, is God showing his approval of this because he uses this to communicate with Saul? And I think the answer to that is definitely no, because this is outright condemned in the old law, in the book of Leviticus. Mediums and necromancers, sorcerers, the Israelites were not to have anything to do with them. Some people also ask, well, does this show that mediums, they're actually doing something when they're doing this process? And in terms of that, I think I'd reserve my judgment on it. I'm not sure. I mean, there are certainly evil things. There's certainly demons that exist in the spiritual realm that have interactions in the physical realm, and what kind of interaction we can have with them or acceptance of them into our lives, by invitation. I'm not exactly sure. However, I think I would just say that it's clear that this isn't something that God approves of. It's not something that disciples should be involved in. We have a direct communication path to God in our prayers. And so this kind of demonic back alley way of communicating with the spiritual world is, I think, dangerous to get involved in. So I just wanted to mention that very briefly to give you a quick thought on it. I know it's not something we can tackle in its entirety at the tail end of a 5-minute Bible study, but I think there's a rise in popularity and interest in this, and maybe coming up with the New Age movement and things associated with that. So I just wanted to briefly mention it. Now, for the application that I actually wrote on the PDF, the government cannot destroy what God protects. After trying to destroy God's anointed next king for years, Samuel told Saul basically that all of his efforts had been in vain and that he was going to die unsuccessful at killing David, and that David would in fact be the next king of Israel. All of the might and the legal authority of the king of Israel were rendered useless against God's innumerable ways of bringing salvation to David and to his men. So a modern application for us to consider would be, can the church survive and even flourish in a place where the government or where the culture opposes its existence? And I think the answer is yes, it absolutely can. And 1 Samuel proves that to us. The story of David proves that to us. It can if God is protecting it. It can if God is blessing it, no matter what forces are coming against it. 1 Samuel teaches us that a king, a government, even a king or a government with a vendetta cannot stop God's work.